Thank you, Joe. I would like to start thanking David and Yale University for giving us a platform to reflect on Rwanda. Speaking of the legacies of the genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda, it's important to remember that 19 years ago, actually soon to be 20 years ago, Rwanda was a failed nation. You walked around the streets from the south to the north, east to the west. It was a pile of dead bodies, women, children, elders, Rwandans, mostly of Tutsi ethnic group, but also of Hutu ethnicity, who betrayed their fellow Hutu for simply opposing the anti-Tutsi propaganda. So when we reflect on the legacies of the genocide in Rwanda, it's important to realize the challenge, the undescribable amount that we had to climb to come back on earth, because then the entire nation had sunk in this genocidal pit. As a nation, it was a challenge to pick and choose our priorities when we're talking about Rwandans killing Rwandans, wives turning against their husbands, husbands turning against their children because they looked like their mothers and they did no longer trust that they were their own kids. Killing was so intimate. Killing was so communal. Killing was so patriotic that we just couldn't afford to ask for justice as we know it. You learned about Gacaca. Gacaca came not because it was the best judicial system, but because looking at thousands and thousands and millions of Rwandans who had participated in the killings, either by picking up machetes or finger pointing to where Tutsi X was hiding, or to screaming enough to scare a little girl like me and Consore to come out of our hiding places. Killing was involved almost every Rwandan except those who were targeted. And some of them were involved not by will, but by force, because it was an act led by the government. So how do you approach justice? And how do you do it in a way that you can bring a nation back together? You can bring a nation back on its foot in a way that it can start making steps forward. That's a challenge. And I don't think any of us would really have an answer. And I remember I was about 20 when this, Gacaca discussion was at the highest peak. And having been an active survivor since the genocide happened, trying to be the voice for those who could no longer speak, or for those who were no longer, I remember sitting in that room as a human rights activist under the umbrella of CLADO. We were discussing how can we tackle these issues? How can we were looking at the cost of keeping all these Rwandans in the prisons that were fully packed. Yet half of the genocidal or the presumed genocidal were not even in jail. But yet I was still feeling the pain of not even knowing where the remains of my father and my 4 siblings were, just like every other survivor in the room. And what do you do? And I remember it was not until it was mentioned that maybe the money that we are using, again, remember, we were left as a nation with no friends. Who could dare telling us that they were our friends after going through what we went through in the eye of the international community, idly watching or actually intervening, not to help survivors, but to channel the genocidal into the refugee camps in the Congo under the zone turquoise. We talked about the lack of intervention, but sometimes we don't mention that the French authorities intervened. They were in Rwanda before 1994. They fought alongside the forces of the same genocidal regime, and they came back with the blessing of the international community, the UN. And when they came back, I met them because I lived in their zone turquoise. And I'm going to tell you and remind you that they did not come to save me, because they did not save me. If they did, we wouldn't be discussing, or we wouldn't be laboring one of the worst killing sites in the entire nation was Becerra, a place where more than 50,000 Rwandan Tutsis and moderate Hutu were killed in the watch of French soldiers. After French came, they mobilized us and made us believe that they were there to protect us. Yet for me, who was moving among the killers through that corridor, I'm here to tell you that we, the killers, since I was disguised among them, moved under that safe zone with our grenades, and most of us crossed into Congo. And this is why we're still talking about the crisis in the Congo, at least one of the reasons we're still looking at the Congo. So the legacies of the genocide in Rwanda has pushed us as Rwandans to know that, in fact, if we fail ourselves, if we fail our nation, we are gone. We have learned that slowly but surely we have to build that political muscle, that economic muscle. And to be able to do that, we have to do it in a way that every Rwandan is a part of that muscle, because we remain a tiny little country with no diamonds and golds, but we want our minds, we want our spirit of never giving up to be the gold that we give to the world. And we want this spirit to transpire even through those who once were called killers. That's how we learned to forgive. And to forgive, we had to start by forgiving our own selves, because when you survive such tragedy, you survive with the guilt. The guilt of being when a million is no longer. The guilt of surviving when for those who were parents, when your entire family was wiped off. You feel so impotent as a man because you could not protect your kids. But you have to forgive yourself if you have to give to forgive anyone else. And we have miraculously done it. But to be able to do it, it takes leadership. It took leadership, by the way, to organize the killings. In the last 20 years, it has taken the Rwandan leadership to move Rwanda beyond the deadly pit with the determination of no longer going back. And to be able to do that, we, the survivors, had to give much more than we could afford. Despite the pain that came with that forgiveness, we forgave before the pardon was asked for. But because we needed it, even for us to pick up our pieces and move forward. And there have been so many homegrown solutions. We talk about reconciliation as if it was just like one box that every Rwandan went through. No, it was multidimensional. It was done in action. It was done in schools. It was done in hospitals. You can't really talk about reconciliation if you're still going to favor one side over the other. If your kid can go to school and mine can't, or we can go to school but I can get a job and you can't, we have to create a system, and we have managed to create a system where every Rwandan at the elementary school level is at this moment enrolled in school. Yet we did that after all the schools were demolished and every money we had was taken into Congo for those who were exiting the country. So we have looked inward. We heard about Gacaca. For the success of Gacaca really being the most comprehensive, I remember it was very painful for us to even accept that we cannot punish those who did wrong, but rather let's find a system where they're going to feel like they can be a part of this new Rwanda and they can move with us. And it was unimaginable at the beginning. But by doing it, we gained. With the survivors, we're able to find the remains of our own people, and that's the biggest justice you can give me. That's the only way I actually came to accept that my 4 siblings and my father and all my grandparents and the more than 100 people from my own family and the million were gone. It is by going to those pits where the bodies were piled up and picking up pieces and recognizing certain things and finding a bracelet like this that was worn by my grandmother for the last 19 years and finding it and clinging to that hope that now that you bury them, now that you restore their dignity, you can move on. But for that to be, you move on and go where? Because there were no home. So it's by creating the economic system where little by little, more people can get jobs. Little by little, more people can have and see the brighter future that we're all trying to forge. And 20 years we are here. We are a celebration. We talk about a nearly universal healthcare system in a nation like Rwanda, where the U.S., one of the most powerful nations, does not have that. You have malaria, you have a place to go no matter who you are. You are at X level to be in school. At least elementary school, we have reached girls and boys parity. But you also heard about women empowerment. Women empowerment, sometimes people feel, well, of course, many men were gone. Why? Because, the target obviously were primarily men first, because the men were regarded as the heads of every household, And most women who remained, the records, public records say that more than 175,000 women were raped. I have to tell you, it's much higher than that number. So what do you do in a nation where you have close to 360,000 survivors in the nation, where primarily female? What do you do? How do you? It's not so much mercy. It's not so much the government policy that has energized all these women to actually occupy all these high places they're in now, leading the changes that we're talking about, that we're here to celebrate. It is really because women, going back in every nation to the history, women have always been doers, but their productivity was never attributed to them. And for once, we have leaders like our own president, who was raised himself by his own mother. I think it came from his own personal experience. He has managed to lead Rwandans in cherishing women because he cherishes his own mother. His own mother who looked after him since age 2 in those refugee camps. And little by little, we changed the constitution. We created an environment where women have access to every opportunity you can imagine. We did not have entitlement to land. Now we do. We are just as empowered as our men counterparts. So I can go on, but I know you wouldn't allow. The time is so limited. I want to bring us back to why we're here. Kwibuka means to remember, as David said. But if we have to remember and just leave it there, I don't think it's necessary that we do remember. Let this memory be a source of endless energy for us to actually come together. Rwandans, despite all the challenges, have come together. I look at my Hutu countrymen, I don't have any hatred anymore. But it was a process. And really, it took some leadership. It took people who could see further than I could. It took people who could see beyond their own personal losses and pain and say, if Rwanda has to come together, we're going to have to make sacrifices. And sacrifices have to be led by the survivors. It was so hard to swallow at the beginning. But now, we celebrate not just the 20th. We can no longer let genocide define us, because we are much bigger than genocide. We are much, as a nation, you hear, I'm from Rwanda. Oh, Hoteli Rwanda, the terrible genocide. That's true. We are here to recognize that that history was ours. But we also want the world to know that we have contributed a lot, starting with our own, unimaginable spirit, the resilience that has taken Rwandans, not just in high places like the UN Security Council, where we remain a very active member, not in places like Haiti, in South Sudan, in Central African Republic, where we remain the most involved change makers through the peacekeeping operations, but we see ourselves as a still struggling nation economically, but a nation with a vision, and a nation that calls upon you today and going forward to make sure that never again that we failed 20 years ago is something that we can make a reality. And we are ready to work with you. We are not just standing by as victims, because we have more than we can proclaim. And the stewardship of peacemakers is what we flag as a flag. I thank you.